Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games from indie to AAA and everything in between to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we're looking at a game I've been waiting for 7 years, the indie game that broke not only Steam but all digital storefronts upon its release, Hollow Knight Silksong. With a protracted development due to just how much extra content developer Team Cherry was making and how much fun they had in the process, this game builds upon the foundations laid by the indie darling Hollow Knight and ramps everything up to 11, which for some people in certain places was a little too much. Silksong is a direct sequel to Hollow Knight and takes place in the kingdom of Farloom, where fan favourite character and protagonist Hornet has been captured and taken to the ancient citadel for reasons unknown. Now, having escaped confinement, she seeks to confront the mysterious power atop the citadel to free her fate. This amazing handcrafted 2D Metroidvania with tough combat and complicated platforming was the most wishlisted game on Steam up until its release, and I can say happily for me, it has lived up to the hype after all this time. This gameplay is captured on my beefy PC via Steam, and only covers the first 6 hours of the game to avoid spoilers. Silksong is available on Game Pass, but I felt this is definitely a game to play on the Steam Deck, hence buying it on Steam, and I'm happy to say that on both devices, I didn't have a single glitch, frame drop, or stuck texture. The game was smooth as butter, regardless of what was happening on screen. Likewise for the console versions, I've heard no complaints on performance whatsoever, a solid indie release. If you want to see my video on the silent development of Silksong, feel free to check out the card on screen now, and without further delay, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. It's time to see if we can untangle the land of Farloom from an ancient web of deceit, disguised as a religion. Following the obligatory introduction cutscene of the Hollow Knight series, we are straight away placed into the Little Red Frog and given our needle as Hornet, a sassy, strong princess from the land of Hallownest. This is where the biggest difference between the original game and the sequel makes itself known. You're immediately given an objective, a purpose in the world. Whilst Hollow Knight dropped you into a town and asked you to just find your way, Silksong provides you essentially with way markers to begin with and a fairly linear path to follow. The more you progress in the game, the less linear this path becomes, but you'll always have the place you're meant to go on the map, even if it isn't clear exactly how to get there. The onboarding process is significantly smoother for new players, and isn't so punishing and unforgiving to begin with, although the challenge ramps up a lot after the first few hours. You'll also find that Hornet talks a lot in this game, as opposed to the mute protagonist of the original. Hornet is witty, strong-willed, and knows exactly what she will and won't put up with.
No, this is, I get manicures, I'm clean.
Gel polish?
That's nail polish?
Yeah.
But it looks nice.
I didn't say it didn't. You just became defensive because you're insecure. Next.
It's these interactions between Hornet and the huge amount of NPCs that really help give the world its life and make it feel lived in, with a laundry list of memorable characters who love to sing songs. And that's one of the main themes of Silksong, music. You'll notice almost every enemy has some sort of musical motif, whether it be a bell for a helmet or an instrument to attack you with, and you'll find bells and music notes literally everywhere in Farloom. I'd be remiss not to mention one of the biggest factors of the game around this point, the beautiful soundtrack from Christopher Logan. The composer for the original game, Chris Logan has created more incredible scores to go with the world of Farloom that can instantly set a tone and a vibe the minute you walk into an area. You know if it's going to be cutesy or whether it's going to be a complete nightmare. My only notes when it comes to the music was it was a touch quiet outside of the boss battles, so if you want to make the most of the soundtrack, be sure to turn it up in the menus. When it comes to the world itself, Metroidvanias live and die on their ever-expanding maps and the rewards for exploration, and Silksong has this in spades. Even 30 hours into the game, I was finding new hidden areas that were not only hard to find, but were entirely optional, for new upgrades but also new bosses. Some of these bosses were so well hidden, I was shocked that something so technically well made was completely optional. A strange choice, but a great way to reward curious players. Sometimes I did have to use a guide to find these things though, as in some cases you can tell Team Cherry framed something, expecting you to understand what they wanted you to do, but my Neanderthal brain just didn't pick it up.
What are you simpletons doing? You're supposed to catch these things, not torture yourself with them.
Not everything should be super easy to find, but some things like a certain Misty section, if you know you know, could have done with some more obvious clues on what to do for the slow gamers like me. With this sequel also comes the introduction of quests, which essentially act as a sort of bounty board in the various town and village areas you come across. These quests are fairly basic in terms of their structure. Usually you'll be tasked with tracking someone through an area, taking out X amount of enemies or fighting a boss or enemy arena, then you get a reward. There are some emergent gameplay moments that can come from these quests, so they're not as basic as they might first appear, but I can see why some people were left wanting something more complicated. In an interesting twist on the typical currency mechanic in Metroidvania games, Silksong deploys two different currency types, rosary beads and shell shards. The shards are collected from pretty much every enemy type, but you get the most from beast type enemies, whereas rosaries can be found on the bugs that have more of a brain behind them. With these religious type pilgrim bugs, you often get more difficult movesets, but the reward is far greater. This dual currency system essentially reduces your options to sit and grind currency for shops, and actually makes it feel like you've earned whatever it is you buy, whilst instilling the world building that only the supposed higher status bugs carry the good stuff. So, with the world and atmosphere firmly praised, how does the game actually play? Well, Hornet is a significantly bigger and better trained warrior than the knight of the original game ever was, meaning she's significantly more agile, jumps higher, attacks faster, and has a significantly wider range of moves to use for both traversal and combat. The downward slash attack was making some waves online upon release, as rather than attacking straight down, it's more of a diagonal attack, and whilst this did take some getting used to, it looked great seeing Hornet flip and somersault over enemies during combat. There's a fairly big skill gap here, as the basic movement of the original game has been expanded on so much that it almost feels a bit more like Blasphemous 2 type Metroidvania, with a heavy emphasis on using a lot of skills and movement to take down the insane amount of flying enemies.
Thank you, daughter. Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
There are over 200 different types of enemy in this game, and a huge number of them are airborne enemies who not only encourage the acrobatic playstyle Hornet should embody, but also to encourage the use of your tools, which replace charms in Silksong, and the majority of people complaining about these flying enemies typically don't use enough of their tools. These tools fall into three subcategories: red, blue, and yellow. Red ones are the ones you physically use in combat, like throwing spears, spikes, a whirly blade saw, or bombs, and are often the best way of bursting down a boss's health bar when things get sketchy, or taking out groups of enemies. These are refilled at benches using the shell shards I mentioned earlier. Next are the blue and yellow tools. The blue tools act like passive buffs, which can increase survivability and grant you extra ways to either damage enemies or gain silk, the bar you deplete to use skills. The yellow tools on the other hand have more tangible effects on gameplay, changing things like movement speed, damage, and so on. After the tools you also have the skills I mentioned before. Strong moves which can cause huge amounts of damage to enemies at the cost of silk, essentially the mana bar you gain from hitting enemies, which you can also use to bind. Binding is the game's version of healing and allows you to recover 3 masks of health at a time. This may seem like an overpowered heal, but as you'll come to find not that far into Silksong, you're going to need it. All of these tools and skills fit into something called crests, which you can find out in the open world, often for defeating tough bosses or completing a complicated platforming section or combat arena. These crests not only have a different number of red, blue, and yellow slots, but they also have unique abilities tied to them, changing the way you heal and even having a completely unique attack moveset for every crest. In some cases, if you're having trouble with a specific boss, say it's fast moving or requires a lot of downward attacks, you can switch up your crest to one that attacks faster or excels at the quote-unquote pogo build. There's a huge amount of build variety to be had here, and whilst there's not as much tool interaction as you'd find in Hollow Knight with the charm combinations, these crests granting completely new movesets and skills totally outweighs any tool interaction shortcomings, at least for me. In terms of the platforming itself, being a veteran of the Hollow Knight series, I definitely had some muscle memory I needed to scrap in order to properly platform in the game. I'm looking at you, Hunter's March. Aside from this, there was never anything so hard that I was pulling my hair out Path of Pain style, and once you unlock more traversal abilities, getting around the world feels almost effortless. Next, let's talk about the standout feature of the game for me, the bosses. Whilst exploration and combat are fun in Silksong, they pale in comparison to how pixel perfect a lot of these incredibly tough fights are. The only thing that shocked me was how hidden some of these masterpieces were. To begin with, the bosses are manageable and fair for the most part, moving slowly and being demanding without being too much. By the end of the game, with the amount of movement options you have at your disposal, these bosses become lightning fast with screen-filling attacks. The designs of these bosses alone could have me talking for hours, and as you can tell, so much effort has been put into handcrafting each and every one of these monsters, but for me, no bosses shine brighter than the fights which feature another single NPC who fights like Hornet does, where it feels like a tactical battle of wits alongside a clash of needles and pins. I'd be remiss to talk about the boss fights though without discussing the inevitable topic of the game's difficulty, which since the most recent patch wherein environmental hazard damage was reduced, mainly stems from the bosses. This is because fairly early on in the game, the bosses start to do 2 masks of damage with every hit, and you can only start with 5 masks. This means every boss can essentially kill you in 3 hits for the entire first third of the game. Even with ample exploration for extra health, you'll not find a way around this, nor a way to upgrade your damage output for a long time, making some of these boss fights early on a war of attrition. By no means do I mean to say these bosses are bad, they're honestly some of the best in the game early on, especially from a cinematic point of view, but in some cases they can feel a little cheap in the damage they do, especially when sometimes they aren't even attacking, you just accidentally walk into them during the fight.
Now that's a lot of damage!
And then we get to the infamous runbacks making their rounds on social media. I have to say this is massively overblown due to some specific bosses. As for, I'd say, 90% of the 40 or so bosses, the runback is totally fine. There are 3 specific boss runbacks I have a gripe with, which I believe are quite easily fixed, with the exception of the Bilewater runback, a mostly optional area which has possibly the worst runback in any Metroidvania or Souls-like game ever created. Either way, my main gripe with the bosses rather than the runbacks are how frequently some bosses are coupled with enemy arena encounters before you can even take the boss on, or spawn ads during the fight, which oftentimes feels a little bit like filler to wear you down, when sometimes the bosses are more than capable of grinding you into bug paste on their own. The last thing I want to mention on the review before we move on to time spent is the heavily optional nature of a lot of the content in the game, specifically Act 3 and how easily you can finish the game without knowing it exists. There'll be no spoilers regarding anything that happens, but considering Act 3 of Silksong provides you with what must be about 10 new boss fights, new areas, new enemies, and a lot of new quests for probably about 15 extra hours of gameplay, it's strange at how hidden it actually is. The ending you get in Act 2 does feel very lackluster, which I suppose is to get you to think there must be more to this game, but it's hard to tell what it is you're missing to actually get more out of it. Fans of the series will know there's more, but essentially having to complete all quests up until that point in order to unlock the option seems strange. And considering how well Act 3 is handled, how much extra lore, story and cutscenes you get for the true ending, alongside all those new areas, enemies and bosses, it just feels wrong for it to be hidden away like it is when it's some of the best parts of the game. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? I scoured every corner of Farloom, completing every optional challenge and boss, bringing peace to the kingdom and achieving 47 out of a possible 52 achievements, which took me 53 hours. If all you want to do is hit credits of any kind, you can completely miss the final third of the game and hit credits at around 25 hours. Instead, if you're looking to get all endings, achievements and collectibles, and you follow a guide, you're looking at about 50 hours plus, similar to my personal experience. If you do use a guide, you'll find the majority of achievements easily attainable at a fairly brisk pace on a playthrough, with the only real roadblocks being bosses. The main one you want to watch out for though is the infamous Steal Soul mode, wherein wherever you die, your save game is deleted, meaning you need to complete the whole game without dying. Couple this with a few speedrun achievements, and you have a tough road ahead that's not for the faint of heart. In terms of value for money, it goes without saying that this game is definitely worth your $20 or £17 here in the UK. The fact you get upwards of 50 hours of non-stop quality gameplay out of an indie game essentially made by a team of 3 people is incredible for that price, and you can even get it on Game Pass. When it comes to respecting your time, Silksong for the most part does have the option of saving and quitting at any time, despite it leaning into the Souls-like territory in terms of game design. This will send you back to the last bench you rested at, but it doesn't take away any of your progress, so there's no punishment for you having to drop the game for any reason. I think the game works pretty well in shorter play sessions, as you can clear an area reasonably well in about half an hour or so unless you hit a setback. The only time where you might fall down a bit is with bosses. As I said before, Silksong works great on the Steam Deck, so is ideal for a pick up and play session without getting too intense, so long as you don't get stuck on a boss, so this is ideal for those who don't have a lot of free time to game. That being said, if you're not one for difficult boss fights, you may feel like half an hour to an hour of banging your head against that brick wall to be a bit too much depending on what's going on in your life at the time, so keep this in mind if you're in a stressful home environment and just want to play something with non-stop progress. If you've watched any of my past videos or know me at all, you know I fully recommend Hollow Knight Silksong. An incredibly large game filled to the brim with secrets, lore, fun platforming and challenging combat, all for an affordable price with zero corporate caveats. This game is without a doubt Game of the Year material, and whilst it's not my personal Game of the Year, it's definitely a solid second place. This game took the original Hollow Knight and created a significantly better iteration of it, which is more fluid and more rewarding to play, where its complexity pushes you to learn more of its mechanics rather than pushing you away and telling you to Yes, a lot can be said about the difficulty of the game presented by the double damage boss's deal, but counteracting this with a laundry list of equipable tools and the fact your heal gives you 3 hearts every time, I believe the balance was well struck between superficial difficulty and genuine challenge in Silksong, and I for one embrace it wholeheartedly. I do wish certain arena sections during bosses could be trimmed, and a few extra shortcuts to avoid laborious runbacks would have made this game beyond reproach, but honestly, this game contains some of the finest designed and implemented Metroidvania bosses you've ever seen, with meticulously designed boss fights to stretch your ability rather than punish you. And unlike with Souls games, there is no cheesing them and moving on, there's just learning the fight down to the last frame of perfect animation. Couple this with the incredible writing of the brand new world and full score from Christopher Larkin, Hollow Knight Silksong is the very definition of a masterpiece, indie game or not. Team Cherry more than lived up to the hype, and have not only laid the template for future indie developers to aspire to, but have firmly put AAA publishers in their place when demanding $80 or $90 for a half-completed product. Team Cherry have already stated there's a DLC coming, and I can't wait to see what's next from this fantastic Australian dev team. Do you have time for Hollow Knight Silksong? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game, alongside an in-depth look at the time you have to invest. Because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you want to see more reviews, deep dives and topical videos, subscribe to the channel, and drop any suggestions for future videos down in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.